Just as an introduction, my name is Sarah Ahmed. I am a staff attorney with Homebase, and I'm joined here by my colleagues, Carla and Sasha, and they work really hard to put together this two-part training with me to be able to go over a lot of great topics that we're going to go over today. And if you guys have any questions or need anything, please feel free to shoot me a question in the chat or shoot Carla or Sasha a question. So yeah, as we're getting started, we would love to get to know you guys and just kind of get to know each other. And so as we start introductions, feel free to unmute yourself and, tell us your name, your pronouns, your organization you're joining from, and one word that you'd use to describe yourself. You're also really welcome to have all of this in the chat if you don't want to unmute yourself. But as we're getting started, I'm excited to see all the input.
I'll start.
Yeah, please.
My name is Yolanda. I'm new to the organization, and I came from the Health Trust, and I'm a new community outreach specialist working in this program. So I'm really excited. One word to describe me, fun.
That's awesome. Thank you so much, Yolanda. Anybody else? Thank you so much, Carla. I guess I did introduce myself a little bit ago, but I'll add the other information. So like I said, my name is Sarah. My pronouns are she and her. I'm here with Homebase. And one word to describe myself. It's going to be a little bit of a combination of nerdy and boring because I feel like all of my current hobbies in the pandemic have been very, like my family says, grandma-y, where I do a lot of like puzzles. I've learned how to bake. I'm trying to teach myself how to knit. So those are my current hobbies that are taking up my free time. Awesome. We have a lot of intros coming into the chat. I'm so happy to see you guys all engage. As people are doing that, I guess we can go to the next slide just to kind of have some Zoom norms out there. So you are automatically placed on mute when you enter the meeting, but please feel free to unmute yourself if you have any questions, comments. I'm happy to have as much engagement and participation as we can in this meeting today. And as you can see in the upper right corner, if you're logging in, and you think that the name that you're logging in with is incorrect, feel free to rename yourself. And please feel free to utilize the chat for also any questions or comments and concerns that you may have. And closed captioning is also at the bottom to be able to utilize that if you need to. All right. Like I said, this training is really meant to foster a lot of engagement and interaction. I think it could be really beneficial for all of us because we really want to hear from you. We really want to see you guys. So if possible, we would love to see your faces. If you would like to turn on your video, please, you should. And if you have any technology challenges and issues, you can message me in the chat. You can message Sasha or Carla, and you can also email us. And the email address is right there at the bottom. All right. As we get started, I wanted to talk a little bit about the way we have organized this training. And one key component that I am really excited about is our panelists that we have here today with us. So we wanted to make sure that we can foster some really good conversations and discussions, and we brought on a great panel for today's training. On our panel today, we have Nicolette Drummond, who is the ERA lead case manager at Amigos de Guadalupe. We have Holly Runsell, who's also a case manager with the HPS program at Home First. We have Edgar Munoz, who's also the homelessness prevention case manager at Sacred Heart Community Service. And these three are some great case managers whose insights I'm sure will prove to be invaluable in today's discussion. And we also have some recorded sessions with Antonia Sandoval, who is a former client. Antonia lives in San Jose, and she wanted to share her experiences when she sought help from the homeless prevention system. To give Antonia's experience a little bit of context, in December of 2020, Antonia and her mom got COVID, and her mom was hospitalized for a really long time, and Antonia wasn't able to see her. And once her mom came back home, it was still very difficult for them as they were still dealing with a whole lot and also grieving the loss of their father who had passed recently. And she tried to seek help from family members and try to figure out a way to help herself in her situation, because she had not received stimulus checks or any unemployment assistance. And she found herself in a very difficult situation where she felt like she had no hope. The video clips that we have are shortened for the sake of time, and we want to acknowledge that Antonia was emotional and authentic in sharing her story. And we also really want to thank her for her willingness to be vulnerable and share what worked well for her as a person being served by HPS. So again, I'm really, really excited for this panel because I feel like the discussions that we can have from all of their experiences would be invaluable today. Can you go to the next slide, please, Sasha? Thank you so much. So the training is overall set up to highlight on 4 focal points. The first being homelessness prevention case management philosophy, the second being advocating for clients and building support systems, then implementing person-centered approaches and incorporating trauma-informed care and harm reduction. And as we work through all 4 of these focus areas, we can kind of flesh out what these things mean and get some input from our panelists here. You go to the next slide, Sasha. Right. So the first focal point is homelessness prevention and homelessness prevention case management philosophy. And next slide, Sasha. Yeah. And so when we're talking about homelessness prevention services, the idea is to be able to identify the principles of how these services are provided and why. And so the driving philosophy in this is that case management is optional for the client, but mandatory for the case manager. And case management should be participant driven. And this can be done by creating an environment in which participants are the drivers in case planning and goal setting based on what they want from the programs and services, rather than what the case manager or the program might think would be successful. And so effective case management uses a strengths-based approach to empower participants, and case managers can identify inherent strengths of a household instead of providing a diagnosis or identifying deficits, because that in turn can then help to build on those strengths to support the household's success to be able to find and keep stable housing. And so the idea is to be able to have structured expectations, be able to provide a lot of information and choice to clients, and being able to address identified needs from crisis response to short-term and long-term goal setting. Can you move to the next slide, please? And to be able to do that, we have to be able to engage successfully with clients. And in prevention, case managers should be working with each household in an individualized and proactive way. Case managers should understand that people have different histories, preferences, cultural norms, strengths, barriers, and responses to stress. And services then have to be tailored accordingly and changed by the person's situation and capacity shifts. So engagement is always influenced by and determined in collaboration with the household. And to be able to do that successfully, it's important to be proactive in the way we're reaching out to clients, being able to clearly describe how the case manager can be helpful, providing repeated, predictable, non-intrusive patterns of interaction, responding to felt needs, and being able to respect boundaries is also really important. And then allowing people to have as much control as possible over interactions also really helps to build trust in engagement between clients and case managers. And of course, being able to demonstrate patience and persistence and being an active listener is also very crucial. Can you move on to the next slide? So as we're talking about engagement and the best ways to be able to foster that, we really want to invite you to add to this discussion and tell us what has worked for you in being able to foster that trust and engagement. And sometimes, if it hasn't worked well, what challenges have you come across? And the things that you didn't think might have been a challenge, but ended up being something that you had to think about. And the way we're going to kind of facilitate this engagement is through a Jamboard activity. And so I can put the link, or one of my colleagues can put the link in the chat, and we can add stickies on the Jamboard. Let me add that and then we can do it. All right. Does everybody have the link for the Jamboard? Cool. Yeah, so feel free to add whatever you think would be really beneficial to this discussion. We're really looking to see what you have come across in your experiences in providing services. And we'll give it a few minutes.
Folks had a chance to use Jamboard before. It looks like at least a couple of folks are familiar, but just in case you haven't had an opportunity yet, it's you can add stickies and navigate the slide with this sidebar over here. So you can hit sticky note and then pick whatever color you want and write your comment, and then save it and place it in the area that you want it in. Folks want to come off mute and share, you're also welcome to, or you're welcome to write comments in the chat, whatever is easiest for you.
Mm-hmm. There's some really great input coming in so far. Someone mentioned that a common challenge can be speaking their language. So I'm assuming having a language barrier, if that's what that's speaking to, which is very valid. Active listening and avoiding having the client repeat themselves multiple times. Yeah. Acknowledge the client's fatigue and find measurable goals that fit in with what they're currently facing. That's great. Somebody mentioned in the chat, losing contact with the clients. I can imagine that's a pretty tough challenge. Someone also mentioned managing, collecting a lot of information and documentation when someone is feeling a high level of stress. That is very valid. Opening space for clients to make their own decisions. That's great. Do more listening than talking. That's always great.
I'm not totally sure what happened with that sticky, but I'll work on it.
It's okay. We can still keep utilizing the chat to keep the conversation going. Understand and acknowledge that this might, oh, where did it go? Oh, there we go. Time restrictions and time management. That's important. So as these are coming in, and this is really great input and feedback, does anybody want to kind of talk about the thing that they have on posted on Jamboard or added to the chat and expand on it?
Yeah, so hello everyone, I'm Holly.
Mhm.
One of the sticky notes that I'm seeing that I think is one of the most like beginning stages for some of our clients, especially, is meeting the client where they're at.
Mhm.
And I think that that can mean literally and figuratively. You know, I've had clients before where we were just having a really challenging time getting in touch over the phone, and I was able to just go over to their home, knock on the door, start a conversation, start a dialogue, and from there we were able to find other strategies. Sometimes that can mean meeting them where they're at, as in maybe they have some sort of different background than you do, and there are some practices within their household or within their style that aren't something that you have worked with before, and trying to find a better way of understanding that so that you can make sure that they are feeling comfortable and not like they're sort of being forced to work in a way that's best for you.
Yeah, that's really valuable. Thank you for sharing that. I saw someone just put in that it's a challenge when a client can have any kind of addiction, and then it's hard for them to complete tasks. So I think that's really great that someone shared that, because then holding space for the personal conflicts and challenges that a client is going through and being able to acknowledge that, I think that's really important. Time restrictions and time management when multiple clients have multiple needs to address. That's also landlord does not respond. Okay. Does anybody else want to kind of give a little bit of input onto what they've put up on the Jamboard and expand on it a bit?
Hello, everyone. I am Edgar Munoz from Sacred Heart Community Service. I do want to emphasize a little bit on speaking their language. As a first-generation immigrant, I myself, English was not my first language. So I know that at times when people are in that stage of that they're learning a language or they don't feel comfortable speaking a language other than their parent language or tongue, they will often be afraid to reach out to landlords, speak with the landlords. They'll be afraid of, submitting applications. They'll just be afraid of the system. So I know that's something that in a course that I've taken that has been very productive is me being there with the client. If they need to have a conversation with the landlord, I will, if as long as the client is okay with it and the landlord is okay with it, we'll do a two-way call, and I'll let the client speak, and then I'll just jump in whenever something needs to be clarified or something like that. Same thing with job applications, right? They'll come into the agency, help them out with that, and then just being there. If they need me to be as a mediator for any interviews, right? I was offering those services. So in general, just helping them navigate the overall system.
Yeah, that's really great. Thank you so much for sharing. Anybody else? Someone shared in the chat that they also try to be with their clients as well. That's great. Anybody else has anything else that they would like to share before we move on from this really vibrant sticky board? I just wanted to note this because this seems really valuable. Systemic inequalities that are challenging to work around, which I'm sure is a reality that all of you here in this meeting can relate to. So that's really fantastic that we're able to give voice to that. All right. If no one has anything else I'd like to share, we can move on to the next slide. Well, that was really great. Thank you so much, you guys. Those are some great tips as to what we can do to build engagement. And if we're talking about building engagement, we're also talking about how we are able to progressively expand that. And so, like I said before, it's really important to remember that case management is optional for the household, but mandatory for the case manager. And so the services are voluntary for the household should they choose to opt in. But if a household is making progress on their own, they don't have to come into case management sessions if they continue to make that progress. However, it is mandatory for the case manager to check in and become, and if need be, become more regular and consistent in their check-ins, as I think most of the times financial assistance is not provided. At least there is an initial check-in. So we're talking about progressive engagement, and we're talking about being able to assess a household's unique strength and circumstances to be able to make that assessment. And realizing that different households might need different intensities of case management, and that can be decided based on the needs of the household and the feedback that you're getting from the household. So being flexible in the intensity and offering only essential assistance until it's demonstrated or requested by the participant that there is a greater need. And the intensity and duration of case management is usually based on the individual household's needs and can lessen over time or increase over time. So programs should be really flexible in their ability to adjust to households' fluctuating needs, and also be able to consider that households may have varying needs that are rooted in cultural preferences or needs based on race, ethnicity, religion, or even sexual identity, etc. So it's also really important to talk about how progressive engagement is also an opportunity for you as providers to really individualize your approaches and ensure that the right amount of assistance meets a household's needs at any given time. And then it also allows the homeless service systems to assess the resources they have available and match them to the household's needs based on the level of need. And so this allows for households who have lower needs to have, a lighter touch in the support that they're getting, and then make sure that people who maybe require a bit more intensive resources, or those resources are available for those with the highest needs. And then this approach will allow for, systems to tailor resources and services to the unique experiences of each household, as opposed to having a one-size-fits-all approach that might provide too little or too much assistance for everybody. So a progressive engagement approach requires the case manager to be also communicate really closely and consistently with the household, because that's how you're able to gauge a household's needs. And then during these interactions, the case manager can be working through a whole host of questions, to kind of identify the strengths of a household, to identify any supports or barriers or obstacles that the household might have as a concern. And so these questions might look like, what kind of progress is the household making? Are there any setbacks that the household has experienced? And what has changed on their journey? Because things don't usually stay the same all throughout. So what has changed that would require more assistance or less assistance? And just being an open and honest and ongoing discussion can really help that to be accurate for the household, the need for the assistance to be accurate for the household and to be effective for the household. And as always, this process, the thing that we've really been focusing on is that this process is really collaborative. It allows for the household to take charge in this discussion, and it really allows the case manager to, provide that space and to be able to clearly identify the ways that the case manager can help once those needs and requests are made. Can you move on to the next slide, please? Yeah, so as we talk about, progressive engagement, and we talk about, having a spectrum from light, moderate to really intensive case management, I really want to open up the floor to our panelists and really put some questions to them to kind of get their insights into how how they're able to first make that assessment of, who needs a light assistance or who needs intensive assistance. And then after that assessment is made, what does that look like? How does that differ all over the board? So I kind of open it up to the panel if anybody wants to go first. Happy to start that conversation.
Yeah, I can go first. So when deciding what level of intensity, I would say it definitely starts meeting the client where they're at, just assessing their current situation. If it's, like they fell behind 1 month and they only need 1 month of assistance and maybe a few resources here and there, or if they need, more of a longer term plan. Definitely assessing where they are will determine the level of intensity. And then also, some people need an extra, I guess you could say maybe like an accountability partner who will be following up and saying, hi, have you, submitted this application? Have you done X, Y, and Z that we talked about before? And yeah, so definitely flexible and depends on the client as well.
Thank you so much, Nicolette.
And I can go next.
Mhm.
So for me, it's obviously on a case-by-case basis. It kind of just depends on where the client is at. So depending if the client has, let's say, technological barriers, language barriers, cultural barriers, and such, that is how I determine a level of intensity. So let's just say, for example, technological barriers. If the client needs assistance, like submitting a housing application or a job application, then I'll usually, we'll meet up with them and do it with them step by step in person. And then with language barriers, like I explained earlier, just being there with them as a mediator for whatever the case may be. And yeah, that's kind of how I'll take that approach.
Great. Thank you so much for sharing that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you guys really said it. I think as we all said, it's really on a case by case basis. It's each individual person kind of has a different set of needs. And I think as you continue to work with an individual client, those needs can change because they are going through a roller coaster at this time. They're facing something that maybe they haven't had to face before. So I think one strategy that I use is whenever I initially communicate with them and we decide that they've been accepted for enrollment, is I will actually just ask, how much do you feel like you want to engage? Do you want to do once a week? Do you want to do every other week? And then continue to re-ask that question. So maybe we'll have a meeting where we'll talk about our plan, and then I'll kind of ask at the end of our meeting, are there any other areas where you can think of that I might be able to support or advocate for you right now? And based on the answer to that question, I can sort of determine what's the next step. Do they need another check-in next week? And maybe initially we don't agree on how often we need to check in. If that is the case, I think that I will probably just pose thoughtful questions like, okay, well, I'm not thinking of an example off the top of my head, but I try to, based on the conversation, pose a question that maybe either leads them in the direction of maybe we should meet again, or leads me in the direction of, okay, every other week is working for us.
Yeah, that's really insightful. Can you guys talk a little bit about a situation, or reflect a little bit about a situation where, you started off working with a client in a very intensive way, or maybe a very hands-off way, and as time passed, you realized that maybe you needed to switch tactics because either the client needed it or you were not kind of all yielding the results that needed to in the timeline that you were working in?
I can start. There's definitely a few cases, after the state program ended, a lot of people were enrolled who owed large amounts of past due rent, since previous programs were no longer available. And for those clients, it was definitely a lot of communication towards the beginning, when we would make requests for, large amounts of money, gathering documents, and then also just coming up with their housing stability plan, and seeing how they could, move forward in a sustainable way. So I feel like for that group, which was probably about 50% of clients I had, who owed a large lump sum and then had to be sustainable, find a way to be sustainable moving forward. It was very intensive at first, and then sort of leveled off, once they were able to, for example, get another household member working, or maybe decreasing some expenses, or whatever the case was. It kind of tapered off at the same time.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you for sharing. Something that came to my mind earlier when you were speaking, Edgar, was, you mentioned a little bit about how it can also be really helpful to hold the client accountable and having an accountability partner. And I saw some people in the audience also really nod their heads to that. Can you expand on that a little bit? And to the audience themselves, if you guys really connected with that aspect, why is that, or why do you think that's really helpful? Feel free to unmute yourselves too, please, or join in the chat.
Sure, absolutely. So yeah, when I brought up accountability, again, it's a very broad topic, but so for me, in my experience, right, when you take a case, right, it begins very very slow, right. You understand the situation, you bring the corresponding assistance, but then depending on the need, right, and depending on the stability plan, we need to either, one, let's say, look for more affordable housing, to look for a higher or additional work, right, a higher paying job. And there's been instances where, like, right, at times the clients will sort of not be responsive and such. So for me, it's, in order to find that balance or that equilibrium, is I'll help. I need to come from a place where, what can I do to help you? So let's just say, for example, in terms of finding employment, if clients have, let's say, places that they know that they want to apply, I will have them go get those applications and come meet me at the agency or on the phone or online, and we'll go ahead and fill those applications together, and then they're responsible for mailing them out. When I do, let's say, a housing search or a job search, right, I will go ahead and compile all those leads, send it to them, and then they're responsible for completing the applications. If they need help, I'll be more than glad to help them. But then they're also required to send me proof, some sort of proof that they have submitted those applications. So that's just kind of a little small example on accountability. I don't know if perhaps someone else wants to go ahead and share their experience or their approach.
Yeah, thank you so much for expanding on that. And yeah, definitely the floor is open. If anybody else in our panel or anybody, one of the attendees really wants to add to that, I'm sure we can all benefit from that discussion. Okay, can you guys talk to the idea of, we spoke earlier about what we can do to really foster engagement and trust when we're first starting to work with clients. So can you talk to about that a little bit more, and then what you can do to make sure that it's consistent and sustainable as you work through with your client over a certain stretch of time?
Yeah, so I think there are some different strategies, but like the more of a relationship that you can create with the individual, I think the better. The more that they sort of know that they're going to get a consistency from you in your conversations. And, you know, even some positive feedback when like the smallest, babyest milestone has been achieved is, I think, a really great way to engage with the clients. And, you know, just showing even sometimes enthusiasm when you're speaking to them. Some of our clients, I mean, at least some of my clients, I can't speak to anybody else's clients, but some of my clients don't get to engage with a lot of other people in their day, especially if they're unemployed. You know, maybe they're living alone, and, you know, some of the elderly clients, they're not speaking to a lot of people. So I think having someone that is calling you to check on your goals, but is also calling you to show that they care about who you are and your success is a huge way to increase engagement. Now, that being said, you know, there's always going to be those challenging cases where you just have to kind of keep calling and hoping that one time. And when they do finally answer, or when you do finally get in touch with them for one reason or another, trying to continue to maintain that same attitude, that you're just happy to hear from them, that you're just, you know, glad that there's engagement and what can we do to move forward, and not putting any frustration or shame or blame on the time that you lost contact. And trying to balance that with, but we really do need to meet our goals. A fun kind of, you know, it's a good way to move forward with that. So those are my thoughts on that.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. You know, being able to kind of hold on to having a human moment and making sure that they are feeling seen and heard, but also being able to hold the client accountable, because that is the best way you can advocate for them. That is awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that. Anybody else on the panel or in the audience? Does anybody have any questions for our panel just about everything we've discussed, opening the floor up for anything, any comments, any concerns, feedback? I really want to make sure that we're able to give you guys time to also process what we're talking about and being able to engage in really open dialogue with each other.
I would just like to add that, you know, it takes time to build that relationship. And I think once a client starts to feel comfortable with you and they feel respected, then they start to open up, but it takes some time.
No, thank you so much, Yolanda. That is really valuable for you to add that, to do the work in and put in that time, because that's going to yield the best results.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. Anybody else want to speak to Yolanda's point or the panelist's point, or just want to add something on their own?
I really tried to not interrupt at all, even when, and I think this is like the hardest time to do it, is when, you know, someone is going on and on, you know, for minutes at a time. You know, I think it's similar to maybe what Holly spoke about, is sometimes people really don't have someone else to talk to, and then it just so happens that we are, you know, that person. And I am tempted sometimes to interrupt, but I just learned it's best to not interrupt and just really listen. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you so much. That's really valuable too. Does anybody have anything else they would like to add before we move on to the next focus point?
Yeah, I'll just go ahead and add that also something that is very important, and I guess it was already said in a way, but essentially earning the client's trust. I think that's one of the most important things. And yeah, absolutely, definitely bringing that positive reinforcement, right? Celebrating the small goal achievements and such. I think that that's one of the best ways to move forward with everything.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much.
One other thing that I'd like to add that I was thinking of when you were talking is acknowledge their birthday. That is huge.
Yeah, that's awesome. Who doesn't like celebrating their birthday, or at least wanting that attention on their birthday? So yeah.
Well, not at this age.
All right. Well, thank you so much, you guys. I really am loving the participation from the audience. And also thank you so much for our panel for continuing to be so engaging. Let's move on to the second focus point so we can keep this going. Yeah, so our second focus point, like I mentioned in the introduction, is advocating for clients and building support systems to achieve housing stability. So if we're talking about this, I think we first have to define what housing stability is, and that is, having permanent housing that which ends up ending the crisis of homelessness. And that can include the client having resources and capacity to maintain housing, and when they're doing that, they're also able to afford and pay rent on time. They're able to follow the terms of their lease. They're able to meet any other housing requirements necessary to stay housed. It's important to mention that housing stability does not solve all of the client's problems. We are all very complex human beings with complex needs and problems, and this takes care of one really important aspect, but this is not, by no means solve all of our clients' problems. And I mentioned this because one of the things to consider is that when you're working with a client to achieve housing stability, you're also working with a client who's a tenant and working with possibly a landlord, and that dynamic can be really tricky to navigate. Situations can arise where a case manager may have to have an uncomfortable conversation to connect with the landlord to see if a tenant can possibly, maybe pay a greater portion of the rent, or a situation might arise where you need to have a really frank conversation with the client about their budgeting and if their contribution toward their rent can increase. So being able to really navigate those conversations and that dynamic is also an essential part of the work that you guys do. Can you go on to the next slide? And to be able to have that housing stability, we're also making sure that we're able to provide and stabilize the client with a sustainable support network. And so that can look like having community-based social supports. That can look like connecting clients to financial support. That can look like connecting the client to advocacy and legal assistance. And it's really about creating a very strong foundation of support that's going to help the client see through their own issues once the case manager is not in the picture. And we really want to highlight the fact that community-based supports are more than just having a resource list that you can provide to the client. It's about working with the client's cultural expectations and needs. Maybe you can connect them to a faith community if they have a religious affiliation, maybe an identity-based community, something that's based like an ethnic-based community, a social group, programs for households with aging adults. So, adult daycare, senior centers, or in-home supportive services, programs with households with young children and youth. So that could look like childcare, after-school programs, tutoring programs, or maybe, if a household's interest is in finding more about nutrition education and counseling programs, or just support groups with, for people who are single or single moms or single dads, or, just anything that they feel like would be helpful for them to be able to make meaningful ties with their own community and make meaningful good relationships that can help provide sustainable support over the long term is really beneficial. Can you go to the next slide, please? So in having this conversation, I really wanted to pitch this back to our panelists and have a discussion on, the ways that you guys are able to support your clients and help them build ties to their own communities, and be really able to go above and beyond just providing a referral list or a resource list.
I can start.
Mhm.
For at least for Amigos de Guadalupe, I would say we definitely invite our clients to events that our organization is having. And that way they have the opportunity to interact with us in person, and with other members as well. So I think that's a really valuable way. And even like tonight, we're having posadas, which a lot of clients signed up for, and will be there, and it's a way to build community. So definitely events.
Events are very important. I used to host a Thanksgiving meal for about 5 years until COVID hit, and then things just changed. But clients were looking forward to that. They didn't have family in the area, so that was kind of like their that it was a special event, and we made it really special for each of the clients. And even to this day, they're still talking about that event. So events are very important.
No, thank you so much for that, Yolanda and Nicolette. That sounds really great. Anybody else?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and go. So for us, what we usually do is we always try and see how can we empower our members. We have different advisory committees which we invite our members to participate in, right? Share their experiences, and then essentially tackle on some of the big issues. And that's a way for us to create a community engagement.
Yeah, that's great. Anybody else? Have any of you had experiences in connecting your clients with groups that would kind of speak to their cultural preferences, or other affiliate groups that have been able to provide really good support to your clients outside of, the sessions that you guys have had with them?
Yeah, definitely. We go through a needs assessment as part of our initial, after we get the client enrolled, and it kind of
Mhm.
goes over all the possible services they could want, which I'm sure we all do. And I've definitely done some research connecting clients to non-denominational faith groups,
Mhm.
community areas that, I have a client who is Vietnamese, and we looked for some places in her area where she can re-engage with the community. I love the fact that you guys do group gatherings. You've got my brain wheels chugging of what kind of things that we can do there. And also something I was going to mention is the SPN network for connecting people with resources and different things. If you're not a part of it, ask your supervisor if they can help you, because there's all kinds of flyers and events and job fairs and opportunities. And I definitely see those emails and go, oh, this is something I can send to this client or that client. So I've utilized that quite a bit for that type of thing.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So it's almost like the community you've built for yourself is also able to really help the work that you're doing. Yeah. Is anybody in the attendees, are you guys relating to having events in your organizations, or have you seen a deal results that you want to discuss? Someone has shared something in the chat. Eugene, would you be comfortable talking about the link you've sent, not to put you on the spot?
Yeah, I'll try to keep it short. But like Holly was saying, just try to find their comfort zones. There's a lot of people, especially for where we work at FSH, there's some people coming in from different states, different counties. I always say we're a little America within America, because everybody gets popped into Santa Clara County for all the gold mine of resources. So just trying to help them feel situated and connected, tethered. We're all communal species, but we all definitely just categorize, and people want to feel closer to people than they ever can. So even if we bring somebody in from, say, like Colombia, there's a different tongue than regular Spanish. So they feel left out. And if I have a whole shelter full of English speaking clients, they're basically just stuck waving at people. So it's very isolating on top of already their plate full of items they're trying to connect to, whether they're going through asylum processes or very intense situations. So just trying to help them feel comfortable, like we would hope that we could feel comfortable. Nobody ever feels comfortable being alone, no matter who likes to say they're comfortable doing that. There's still always like a network we're part of. So us as human beings, we just need to be communal in some sense. But Language Line is also a wonderful resource. If you don't speak the language, you can at least get something that can interpret for you, and you can put your whole heart and vibe into that translation, and try to do your best to help somebody feel comfortable. But even just being able to communicate with the words itself is very helpful. So Sunday Friends is just in the community, you know, in the thick and thins of everything, just trying to get people to their right minds, their base of zero. You know, I always compare the social standards to a race, and if people can't even make it to the race, then there's no fairness in trying to say that they can keep up with everything else. So that's limited by our families, our cultures, our generational knowledge that gets to be passed on or not passed on. Because if you're not passing on anything, then you're limiting your kids and their kids. So, and then everybody who makes the argument that everybody wakes up with choices to make, and once you're 18, you're an adult, you should fight with society and be able to keep up. That's kind of like, well, try to have a different deck of hands when you're born and see how you do, you know, with the being left out on high and dry, trying to connect to things in the dark. So I don't want to talk too much more, but Sunday Friends is very helpful. But I'd say it's just very much a hand holding type of organization. I also, you know, look to like big brothers, big sisters, sometimes just a caring, you know, kind person that can help somebody feel comfortable. We all work within the system. I never thought I'd work within the system at some point in my life, but systematic structures don't really get the best vibes if you're just looking at the outside of it. But the people that bring it to life are how we make the work actually work.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Thank you so much for that input. You know, really being able to lead with empathy and being able to center that as you're working with all people from all sorts of backgrounds and experiences is really important. Thank you so much for sharing that. Anybody else that wants to kind of add to Eugene's point or anything else that they would like to discuss? And I'm aware we have attendees who do all sorts of work, great work, and have all sorts of experiences. So we really can all benefit from so much from each other's knowledge too. So anything that you guys have to add, please feel free to unmute yourselves, add it into the chat. Really happy to respond to it or add it to the discussion. Okay. Let me go back to my slide of questions. To the panel, I would ask, are there any strategies that you have found to be more effective in de-escalating client and landlord conflicts? It would be really helpful if you're able to, you know, describe a challenging client-landlord conflict with you or a colleague that you were able to help resolve, and like what was the thought process in being able to get that done.
I think one of the roughest for me is when clients and landlords are not agreeing on what is owed. And then at that point, it just, you know, becomes gathering paperwork, which can also be a challenge, especially if, you know, usually larger corporations are very, you know, are more organized and have ledgers. But the challenge is when it's, you know, someone elderly, for example, who is writing what the client owes on a piece of paper, and then the client says they paid, and the landlord says they didn't pay. So when something like that happens, I definitely try to get any paperwork, from the landlord, from the tenant, okay, did you pay? Did you get a receipt? How did you pay? Usually if you can figure out how they paid, then you can, did you withdraw the money from your bank account or whatever method they used, just gather proof. And then, definitely landlords also, make mistakes, and just bringing the paperwork from both sides, trying to consolidate them and see what the difference is, and then approaching one of the parties with just the goal in mind of, we're trying to assist, I'm here to help. And it also always helps if it's, in my experience at least, a case manager is kind of like a third party. So, if things are heated between the tenant and landlord, someone new coming in may help or may
Right.
make things worse. I don't know.
So, having the role of the third party mediator to be able to talk between both parties. Yeah, that's really valuable. Thank you for sharing that. Anybody else on the panel or anybody in the attendees?
Yeah, I think you guys said it really, just being able to play that mediator role, and just keeping, because I think we can really help keep the emotions out of it, right? We just need to know the facts. So I can go to the landlord and say, hey, can I get the ledger? Can you help me understand? And then they can provide that for us. A lot of times I feel that these conversations take place via email, which can be better, because then you have like the documentation and, it's just, there's no tone, there's no implication.
Yeah.
It's just, this is the thing that I need. And then, kind of going back to the client and figuring out what the error was or what the issue was. Yeah, just playing that role of mediator can be one of the most helpful things.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, and then I'll just go ahead and add that. Yeah, it definitely understanding both sides. You're right. I mean, the landlord has the need to get paid, and at the same time, right, we need to understand, or not understand, but sort of make the landlord understand that we are doing everything we can to help out the client. So definitely keeping that those transactional boundaries is very important when at least trying to diffuse a situation with the landlord.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes absolute sense. Thank you for sharing that. So I guess if we're talking about, playing the role of a mediator in this aspect, I guess moving on from this a little bit and talking about, how your clients are people who have a lot else going on in their lives. So how do you kind of, if you're talking about boundaries, keep yourself in a place where, you don't fall in the trap of wanting to support your clients with all of their challenges? How are you able to stay housing focused and make sure that you're able to kind of be very clear with the client and yourselves too, that, this is the goal, to have stable housing and work towards that when your clients kind of come in with everything that's happening in their lives?
I would say kind of keeping the housing approach as a consistent reminder when you are having meetings, and remembering like to address the initial goal of how are we working to stabilize your housing. So if someone does need something additional or another resource, kind of finding a way to sort of insert that reminder or ask that question of like what it's leading to. And it's good to remind myself as well, because I think we all care about the people that we're working with. And they are going to tell us additional personal things about their lives and the interactions and conversations that they're having. So kind of writing that down and having that reminder of, okay, if we are going to address this other service, how does that lead to success in the future? Keeping myself and them on track.
Yeah, that makes sense. Anybody else?
Yeah, I think the the housing stability plan really helps with this because we can keep um, all the different moving pieces in one place to refer back to, as far as increasing income and what things they're going to try, as well as reducing expenses and what the kind of update is on any one of those goals. And yeah, definitely, in follow-ups, just inquiring about how they're doing and what steps have been taken, um, you know, towards the goals that were set before.
Mhm. Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you so much for sharing. I saw that there was some great input in the chat. If anybody wants to expand a bit on that, someone said that, making sure to remind both parties, I'm assuming this is to the landlord and tenant question, that your role is to find a sweet spot that works for both groups. Yeah, so to make sure that both groups feel like you're there to help and to advocate for them and that you're not taking any sides, quote unquote, it's helpful to be able to facilitate that conversation. Yeah, fantastic. Well, thank you so much. Once again, I felt like, your input is so helpful in being able to facilitate this conversation. And as we move on, I continue to keep hoping to have these great conversations. So we heard from our case managers, but we really thought that we could benefit from the point of view of a client too, to kind of hear a little bit about, what works for them, what has been especially helpful in their journey. And like I mentioned earlier in the introduction, we had a former client, Antonia, who really wanted to talk about things that her case managers did that were done right and made her feel heard and that her needs were being met. So we'll go ahead and play that video.
Como Margarita, que se toman el tiempo, que toman en serio su trabajo.
I just want to double check everyone can see and hear that when it's played. Okay, cool.
Que tienen amor por el trabajo, que tienen ese espíritu de ayudar a las personas que se acercan, que cuando yo le platiqué, le di mi testimonio, ella lo hizo con respeto, me escuchó con respeto, ¿verdad? Recuerdo que me decía, lo siento mucho, no voy a olvidar esas palabras que me decía, lo siento mucho, no se preocupe, la voy a ayudar en lo que pueda, la voy a referir a más programas. Y así es como ella me refirió a más programas. Y algo que nunca voy a acabar de agradecer es me refirió con el abogado de migración. Y de ahí he encontrado esa luz que tanto yo buscaba, ¿verdad? Que tanto yo estaba buscando para mi situación en este país.
Does anybody have any thoughts about what Antonia discussed? How did it make you feel listening to her feedback about, the work that you guys do, but being on the receiving end of that? Any thoughts there?
Well, I'll just say that it really does, everybody who's here, everybody who's working in this field, it really does help to have a caring person helping you, talking to you as if you were one of them. We're all in the same community, we're all the same people. And it would be wonderful to have someone on the other end, if we were ever in crisis, to have someone that cared for us and treated us with the same type of dignity. So I always make the motto, treat people how you would want to be treated and treat people how you would want your family to be treated. So it just kind of stamps that we are real people dealing with real people with real problems, and it just never a moment to take collapse and treat anything other than as super serious as it really is, because it matters.
Yeah, absolutely. And it sounds like it really impacted her that the person was able to treat her with respect and also really take into account all the concerns she had, which was clearly, working to find stable housing, but also her legal concerns and making sure that she was connected to the right resources that would be able to help her out. So thank you so much for sharing, Eugene. Anybody else? Okay, well, we'll continue then.
Como
Next slide.
Margarita, que se toman el tiempo.
Yeah, were there these back?
I just want to add something to that. I think for a lot of our clients too, we don't always know what they're going through, what challenges they are facing out there in the real world. And I think it takes a lot of pride for somebody to come forward and really like open up to us and let us know their problems. Some of our clients feel embarrassed coming to us. So it does really just take that leap of faith and that dignity to come out of that comfort zone and to like reach out for that support. And that definitely resonated with me as well, because I feel like, you know, like if you kind of put yourself in their position and understand like what our clients are going through and the challenges that they're being faced with, I think that, like she said, there is light at the end of the tunnel and we're helping them show them that light. So I think that really like was the whole purpose of, you know, her testimonial.
No, you're very correct. Just even when I was first talking to Antonia, you know, I could just really appreciate her willingness to be vulnerable and to be honest. You know, it's not always easy, and to be able to do that in such an open way, it's really valuable. And I really appreciate you saying that. Anybody else? Okay, then I guess we can go to the next slide. So we wanted to do a little activity here based on the discussion we just had about being able to navigate landlord-tenant relationships, with the case manager kind of being the mediating party in the middle. And we wanted to kind of center this little hypothetical and 2 follow-up questions for your discussion before we split people up into breakout groups. We really wanted for you guys to think about, you know, if you're in a situation where a client and where you see a client's monthly budget and you assess that the client can perhaps contribute towards rent or contribute more towards rent than they were, and then you realize that the landlord's also asking for the whole amount. So how are you able to broach this topic with the client? How are you able to have this conversation with the landlord to make sure that you're incentivizing them to come to the negotiating table? And how are you able to kind of get both parties' concerns and get them to agree on something in the middle? This is really open-ended. We just kind of wanted to get your thoughts on, you know, how you would go about this. So we wanted to break out and go on for 5 minutes for discussion and then meet back here and see what we come up with. And I think Carla has put the questions in the chat. Thank you so much, Carla. So yes, the questions are in the chat for you to be able to refer to that.
All right, about to open the breakout rooms. See you guys in 5 minutes. Just wanted to make sure that maybe Marlena and Esmeralda, that you guys weren't having any technical issues getting into the breakout room. If you're not, that's totally okay, but just wanted to make sure.
Do you want me to jump into any of them? Or I was trying to see if there are any that look like they didn't get enough people or anything like that.
Yeah, maybe room 13. Let's see if I can put you in there.
Cool, thanks.
Thanks, Erin.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back. I hope your 5 minutes were really fruitful and you were able to have some good discussions about how you would go about this hypothetical situation. Does anybody want to kind of talk about what was discussed in their group or just walk us through their thought process?
Hi, I'm Yolanda again. Sorry.
No, please don't be.
One of the conversations that I had with I think her name is Maravella.
Mhm.
She shared that she creates a budget with her clients and is upfront with them, knowing that what their portion is going to be. Also, if there are late fees involved, she will ask the landlord to remove them and just establish a really good, solid relationship with your landlord so that when there's events like this, they won't get escalated. They'll come to you and say, I've got an issue here. So I think just also try to put yourself in the landlord's place, because that could be their sole income. So she brought up some really great points that I hope they help others.
Yeah, that sounds really valuable. So being able to have established relationships and systems in place, so that if a situation does come head on, you have a way to go about it. That sounds really good. Anybody else?
I was just commenting in the group that the question seemed kind of open-ended, which probably was done intentionally.
Mhm.
But because if we're as case managers stepping in, providing the rest of the rent, then the landlord's going to be more amicable. But if it's just asking the landlord, can you give the tenant more time? Can you work out a payment plan with them? That's a different subject, and the landlord's going to be more resistant to that. And then we were all sharing about how that conversation with the client about their contribution, preparing them as much possible in the upfront, in the front end, letting them know that this is the expectation and that we will be asking that, if it's more than 1 month, that the second month they're going to make a greater contribution, or by the third month they're going to have to pay the whole thing completely. But the question didn't specify if the agency is providing the rest. It just says the tenant can provide a portion, the landlord wants everything. So that's the part I was thrown off a little bit.
Yeah, and I think I appreciate you bringing that up because those are separate situations, but I think there's value in being able to kind of talk out what both of those situations can look like. And I appreciate you kind of being able to say that it would be different and how it would be different. So thank you for pointing that out. Anybody else want to talk about what they discussed or how they thought through the problem?
Yeah, so we also kind of went over a little bit setting the expectation at the beginning. So I know one thing, like as a best practice that we like to say is we don't ever guarantee financial assistance, right? We're always kind of going back on that. You can be reassessed for future assistance, but we never guarantee that. And we also always remind clients, like, this is a temporary program. And then also holding them accountable to what we agreed on. Like we talked about, doing their monthly check-ins with their budget sheets and their action plans. Like if the goal is to increase your income by 2-3 months, we have to revisit that goal and be like, okay, so what progress have we done? What have we made? What have we done to contribute to progressing these goals? So obviously there's patterns that can sometimes happen with some of our clients that we sometimes it like the months will fly by. Like at least I like to think that 1 minute we're paying their rent, the next minute there's okay, we're now rent's due again. So the months literally do fly by. And I think just keeping them accountable for their own their goals and their action items. And then again, going back to having that foundation, setting the expectation at the beginning, and then also just being in a good communication with the landlord, because I think that landlords also know their tenants more than we do, and they will definitely pull their card and they'll know oh, this client's been doing this for a whole year. You're the third program they've worked with. So, it's kind of just okay, what are we doing as case managers to help them be successful? We have to set them up for success. We can't allow them to get too comfortable where they're at, because if we don't, then they're never going to be given that push to to be able to be out there and doing it on their own.
Thank you so much for sharing. So it sounds like, expectation management from the get-go, but also really, like you said, setting up your client for success. And that looks like great advocacy. And great advocacy can also mean holding your client accountable and making sure that they're following up on the things that you guys agreed upon. So thank you so much for sharing that. That's really valuable. Anybody else has anything to add to what was discussed in their rooms or how they process this? Is there anything in particular that any one of you on our panel would do? Something that you want to make sure you would check in or talk about with your client or the landlord?
I would say for me, the best when it comes to talking about maybe increasing the amount they can contribute, it always goes back to going to the facts so that it doesn't become like anything personal. So I love to, if I'm sort of feeling that the client might be able to contribute more, I like to review their budget with them so that we can look at what's coming in, what they need to spend money on. So usually if I'm wanting to make a modification, it's a matter of just kind of reviewing the budget and saying, okay, what I'm seeing is going to be left over. How much of that do you think you can contribute? And then it just helps set new goals for, looks like maybe we spent a lot on food this month. What resources are out there that we can help trim that down, that kind of thing. So probably the most likely strategies I would use, just being able to show them, hey, this is what I'm looking at. So that it's factual. It's not personal. It's just like, this is what we got. What can we do?
Yeah, and it's factual, but it's also really collaborative. You're working with them. You're not telling them to do anything. So it's also helping them lead that conversation. Thank you so much for that, Holly. I appreciate that. Well, if anybody else has anything else to add, please feel free to unmute yourselves or add it into the chat. If not, we can move on to our next focus point. Thank you so much, Sasha. So our third focus point has been implementing a person-centered approach. And we've heard this phrase a lot since we started this training event, and that is making sure you're meeting the client where you're at and making sure that you're having a client-centered approach. And that begs the question, what does that mean? And we think that the following 3 points can really shine some light on that. And so that means advocating for the client and their immediate needs and helping them to problem solve. That can mean respecting the client's concerns and respecting their questions. And that can mean, not making any assumptions about where people are at and being able to ask really good questions to be able to kind of get to the stem of any issues or barriers that they might be facing. So we talked a little bit about, advocating for the client and holding them accountable and like working with them and collaborating with them to make sure that the solutions come to are a collaborative effort. It can also really mean that you're advocating for a client's immediate needs and not judging them and helping them just problem solve that immediate need. So one of the examples that, kind of came up in our discussions as you were kind of putting this together was, if there's a client that has an issue with addiction and it's impacting the way that they're spending, and that spending is then in turn impacting the way that they're able to afford their rent or not being able to afford their rent, but they're not there yet where you can have a conversation about giving up their addiction. That's a whole different conversation. Meeting them where they're at and helping them to problem solve that immediate need can also look like helping them to create a budget around their addiction and helping them to really absorb this reality of their life into that budget and accounting for it, and then seeing what we can do to get them to a place where they can pay their rent and still in fact account for this reality of their life. And so we really want to focus on this idea that a client-centered approach can also look like eliminating unnecessary rules and requirements, and implementing a strengths-based approach, and that really empowers the client's autonomy and independence, and rejecting the idea of a non-compliant client, and making sure that we're able to see them as whole people who come in with their own issues, who come in with their own problems and concerns and cultural backgrounds, and really being able to hold space for all of that. Can you go to the next slide, please? And I mention all those things because all those things play a really important part when you sit down with the client to be able to set accomplishable goals. And we want to make sure that, when you're supporting the client, you're able to identify clear, actionable goals step by step as to not overwhelm anybody with how big the task is. Being able to also really being explicit about how you as the case manager can help in this process is really helpful, because then it really outlines clearly what their support can look like. Division of responsibility can also be really helpful, and it can depend on the client's willingness and ability. And being able to also be honest with the client and having those open conversations if a goal is not accomplished is really important, because those conversations will then allow you to kind of get to the core of why that was not accomplished. And sometimes that might lead to kind of breaking down that goal into even smaller steps that can be accomplished, and those can be smaller milestones between each bigger task that needs to be done. And that's really important, because having clear, tangible goals can give a sense of accomplishment to the client and can spur them forward in the rest of their process. Sometimes we just need somebody to be in our corner, and that can be really helpful when you're having these frank conversations. And when you are following up with the client, make sure to ask about really concrete goals that they have and holding them accountable to the things that have been mutually agreed upon, and checking in on them, because I think at the end of the day, it's really important that they know that there's somebody that cares and is asking them because they care. Yeah, so that's what I have on this slide. Does anybody have any feedback on that, or anything that they can relate to or want to contribute to? Does anything resonate with somebody? If not, we can move on to our panel again to see what their take on this is. So to the panelists, I would ask, how are you able to really balance the task of respecting client boundaries and still being able to ask really good questions without making the client feel like you're judging them or prying into just really personal aspects of their lives? And if you have any examples, that would be also great to kind of demonstrate that.
Yeah, as far as respecting boundaries, I would say, just agreeing on a time to meet with a client, whether it's like a week from now, a month from now, 2 weeks. If you're both agreeing to your next communication meeting, I feel like that's respecting their boundaries versus just calling them out of the blue. And definitely, returning calls is very important, and definitely also, yeah, as far as follow-up questions, I typically will say, once we are setting our goals, I'll say these are our goals, for example, 1, 2, and 3. And, is 2 weeks enough for you to work on these? And then we'll together, or they might say, no, I need a month. And then just agreeing on when we'll meet again, specifically to follow up on these and just see how they're doing overall and how things are going. So yeah, just agreeing when there will be communication, I think, is a good way to respect boundaries.
Yeah, that's really great. That's helpful to know. Anybody else?
Yeah, for me, or my intake on that is definitely being flexible with the client. For example, if there's instances where they didn't meet a certain goal for whatever the reason may be, but if they don't want to share why, if they don't want to reveal anything, I think it's important to at least give them that space for a short term. Just give them that breathing space so that they can go ahead and perhaps do a reflection and then checking back later on. And at the same time, also just giving them the space to make their own decisions. At the end of the day, oftentimes clients know best. I know that I've been in situations where I think that we should take one approach, but then the client will say, you know what, let's do something else. And that ends up being the best thing that we could have done. So definitely giving them the flexibility of making their own decisions and coming forward to share information when they feel comfortable, obviously respecting certain timeframes.
Yeah, that's really important. Thank you so much for sharing that.
Something that comes to mind when it's with the question of like, how do you balance respecting the boundaries while asking good follow-up questions, is basing the questions that I have maybe on a piece of information that the clients already felt comfortable sharing with me. For example, I had a client I was working with that had a pattern of losing jobs consistently because eventually they would get really frustrated in the place they were working at, overwhelmed, frustration with the person that hired them. And they had expressed to me that they had mentioned in like a previous conversation that they really didn't like being told what to do. And so we were having another follow-up conversation about it. And I just sort of brought up that I said, you know, you said to me in the past that you didn't have, you know, you really didn't like being told what to do. Was there something that like you wanted to expand on that? And we ended up having a conversation where this client was basically able to help me understand some past trauma that they had that led to that. And then from there, I was able to ask questions about what strategies they've used in the past to successfully address that. And we were kind of able to have a conversation about what was it possible to use those strategies while you're at work, using your new job? Is it possible to, you know, so that individual was able to completely, I mean, if you think about it, they did all the work. I was just asking questions and they were like, oh yeah, this is where it comes from. And this is what I might be able to do. And fingers crossed, but for now we have a job and we're still there. So I'm hoping it continues to be that way. But that's one strategy that I will use is just kind of, you know, if someone's already mentioned something to you, it's possible that it's not a boundary. They're willing to expand more on it. So.
Yeah, I'm really happy you shared that because you characterize that as a conversation and not you asking questions. So that really, I think, changes the tone then too. It's not as interrogatory. And yeah, like you said, they did all the work and it was led by them and they kind of, and then I think people like to stick to things that they have come to a conclusion on themselves. So yeah, that's really valuable. Thank you so much for sharing that. To kind of build on that, then I would ask, you know, how can you make clients feel empowered to take and implement actions to ensure their own stability? Because we really want to focus on, you know, clients being able to really exercise their autonomy and agency, even in their end goals. So how are you able to help facilitate that? Holly, did you have an idea?
I was trying to make sure that we were going in order in case, since I was just speaking, but yeah, I don't mind. I mean, sort of what I said is kind of similar to that. You know, asking them about things that they've done in the past that have been successful, and then kind of utilizing that to see if there's ways that those other tools can be used to be successful. And I think that really works because as I think multiple of us have previously mentioned, I mean, the people that we're working with are going through some of the toughest times potentially that they've ever been in, or it's been a string of tough times. So reminding individuals of a way that they have been successful or a job that they've done in the past that they really like is exciting in a way. And then suddenly you're both smiling and you're engaging in this positive, and then kind of celebrating that with them and coming up with new ideas is a way that I think can make them feel empowered. Just remembering, hey, there was a time that I was really good at that, and maybe I can be good at it again.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Edgar, Nicolette, did you have any feedback to that?
Yeah, so I think that also just piggyback or just shining light on what
Mhm.
Holly said. I think it's very important to always highlight the client's strengths. Why? Because that's how we can get into conversations of like, okay, like Holly said, like what has worked, what can we do? Can we
Mhm.
do something like it? And yeah.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, agree with you both. This is a question I struggle with a lot because I'm just thinking what empowered means to like the client. Like, does that mean they're paying their own rent fully? Does that mean they're able to be like self-sufficient?
Mhm.
Um, so it's hard to answer. Um, yeah.
I think there's a lot of value in like you being vulnerable and sharing that, because that is a reality of the work you do, and maybe it's helpful to like define what empowered means in that relationship with your client and then work off of that. Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. And I guess the last question we had for the panelists on this focus point was kind of something that you already touched on, Nicolette, was how are you able to effectively goal set with clients? So you gave us a few examples of, having set times to check in with, having, consistent ways that are agreed upon beforehand so that the client also is able to manage their own expectations. And I was wondering if, Nicolette, you again, or Holly or Edgar have any other things to add to the ways you're able to effectively goal set with your clients.
Yeah, I think getting their buy-in is very important. They have to want it too. I want it for them. I'm sure we all,
Mhm.
Want them to be stably housed. But they definitely have to, buy into the plan and put work in as well. So I definitely do try to get their buy-in for goals, asking them, is it achievable, in this amount of time? Do you need more time? Um, I think not to go too much off topic, but I feel like the challenge, and I'm open to hearing what anyone else might have to say about this, but the challenge is when um, the goal, or it seems like the overall goal of this program and others is to have individuals stably housed. Um, but if their goals kind of go in a different direction or don't lead towards being stably housed, it can be challenging. So I try to keep the focus there, um, small goals that will help them be stably housed. And yeah, it's just challenging when their goals maybe go in a different direction.
Sorry, I was muted, but yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you for sharing that. I appreciate that input. Okay. Does anybody have any feedback or thoughts on what's being discussed in the attendees? Happy to know what you guys are thinking too. Or if you have any questions for the panel to follow up on what they have said, please feel free to unmute yourselves or add it to the chat. Okay. Well, the next set of questions that we had were proposed to Antonia to kind of get her perspective as a client. And we kind of asked her to reflect on the ways that she felt supported by her by her case manager best, and what was eventually successful for her, what made this experience successful for her. And so these were her responses to those questions.
Margarita, mi primera manejadora de caso, ¿verdad? Ella me dijo que me iba a mandar todos la aplicación, por correo electrónico, pero yo le dije que se me hacía muy difícil manejar la tecnología. Entonces ella me dijo, no se preocupe, usted puede venir a la oficina, yo le voy a imprimir los papeles, usted los llena. Y entonces esa fue otra manera de ayudar, en que ella me ayudó, en que ella me dio otras opciones, no solo me dejó con eso. Si yo no puedo usar la tecnología, ella me dio más opciones de ayudarme, encontró otros caminos para que la aplicación avanzara pronto, ¿verdad? Entonces, es algo realmente que agradezco mucho el espíritu que tiene ella, que tuvo ella conmigo de ayudar, ¿verdad? Ese espíritu, ese amor por su trabajo. A veces tal vez yo pienso que no es el trabajo de nuestros sueños, pero simplemente el tenerle amor al trabajo, a ese espíritu de ayudar a las personas como yo, que en verdad necesitaba ayuda, que me acerqué a esta agencia porque en verdad necesitaba ayuda.
I believe, Sasha, there's one more video after this one.
Cuando yo fui y me entrevisté la primera vez en persona, yo llegué, ella ya tenía todos los papeles que yo iba a firmar, estaba totalmente lista, preparada para que yo llegara a firmar a los papeles y no hubiera atrasos en la aplicación, ¿verdad? Entonces eso agradezco mucho en ella, el profesionalismo que tuvo conmigo, la ayuda que me brindó. Nunca pensé que me iban a ayudar tanto en la agencia Amigos de Guadalupe, y realmente me dieron más ayuda de la que yo esperaba. Me abrieron muchas puertas, me dieron mucha ayuda y todavía sigo ahí, sigo con más ayuda porque conocí a otras agencias que brindan más ayuda, ¿verdad?
Yeah, so that is what Antonia's feedback was when I asked her those questions. And I'm wondering, if you as the attendees have any impressions from this, any thoughts from what she had to say. Happy to hear from you guys. Is there anything she said that made a really strong impact? And this is open to the panel too. I don't want to exclude anybody from this discussion. Open to everybody. Is there anything that?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and say something. I think that what she said about finding out about other agencies that bring other assistances is something very powerful. I know that in my experience, I have utilized services from Amigos de Guadalupe. For example, they have a great Safe Park program, their Homes of Hope program. So that those are things that I know that I've reached out to see if I could connect some of my clients who need those services. And yeah, that's something very important, like tapping into our partner agencies for collaboration.
Thank you so much for saying that. Yeah, leaning into your network to be able to provide holistic support. That sounds great. Anybody else? Is there anything that you said that surprised you?
I guess just that, just the simplicity of what her case manager was able to do and how much those acts were able to transform this person's life and perspective. Just us just showing up and doing our jobs, I'm sure for all of us sometimes doesn't feel like enough, but I think this is a great example of how it can be. And on those days where you do go above and beyond, just imagine the difference that it's making.
Thank you so much for saying that. And I'm sure that has a lot of value for people here too, other people here too. So yeah, that's very true. Okay. And again, as I keep saying, if you have anything that you want to share, please feel free to add it to the chat. Thank you for commenting on that, Yolanda. It is very heartfelt, and it showed that the case manager had a lot of patience with the client and held space for the things that really matter to the client. So thank you for saying that. If there's nothing else, I think we can move on to the next slide.
Cuando yo
Yes. So the final focus point of today's training is how we can incorporate trauma-informed care and harm reduction principles into the care that U.S. case managers provide. And I really kind of wanted to start by saying that this could be its own training in itself. It is such a vast topic. So this is really kind of a high level overview of like, what does that mean? What do those words mean? Trauma-informed care and harm reduction, and what does that look like implemented in your work? Can you go to the next slide, Sasha? So we have a list here of behaviors and symptoms that may indicate trauma. And, this list is by no means exhaustive. And there's no one size fits all diagnosis here. There's no one thing that could indicate to a trauma history. Rather, people carry many different things with them as survivors of trauma. And these symptoms are not proof that a person has experienced trauma. However, it is safe to assume that it's such a high percentage of people who are seen by your agencies and by you, that they have experienced trauma. And it's helpful to kind of treat all clients as they've experienced trauma, because then you can show up in very holistic ways for them and make sure that you are meeting them where they're at. Can you go to the next? And so this is kind of a very summarized version of what we think it means to take a trauma-informed stance. So being able to accept the participant's experiences as true and that the trauma was not the participant's fault. Being able to understand that the behavior may be a technique that the participant uses to survive past or present traumas. And that acknowledging that the trauma can both be a cause and a result of the client's mental health diagnosis, and being able to also respect in all ways possible the choices that the client is making and offer choices to them if necessary, but always ensuring that you're able to really respect their boundaries and take into mind things that they're comfortable with. And finally, being able to remember that the real question is not what is wrong with you, but what has happened to you, because that really opens the space for a person to enter with their full experiences and makes them feel comfortable to start talking about things that might be very difficult for them to talk about. I know throughout this training, we've really touched on, the kind of leap of faith it takes to come into these conversations. And I just really wanted to reiterate that again. Can you go to the next slide, please? And so here we have a list of resources that we thought would be helpful once you guys get the slide decks, to kind of take a look at and kind of read the research and read a little bit more into the organizational toolkit that can help to streamline this process and how you can think about trauma-informed care as you work with your clients. And that kind of leads into this discussion of harm reduction and what that means. So harm reduction involves taking action through programming and policies to reduce harmful effects of behavior. And so the key here is to really make sure that it's involving a range of non-judgmental approaches and strategies aimed at providing enhancing knowledge, skills, and resources to be able to support your clients and their families, and so that they can make informed decisions and be healthier individuals and households. So we kind of have a few principles outlined. And I think the first principle's core is that, it's non-judgmental. It's a very pragmatic, non-judgmental approach to being able to address high-risk behaviors, while keeping in mind that people are complex, multifaceted beings and what the consequences of that can look like. Principle 2 is that, the focus is on reducing harm and not really fully eliminating a behavior. So I think this kind of ties in the earlier conversation of very much talking about the acute problem and helping them problem solve to their immediate needs. So it's, what is acutely affecting them now. Principle 3 is focusing on the individual's choice to manage or mitigate the risk of the high-risk behavior. So again, we really want this to be led by the participant. We really want them, you know, like Nicolette said earlier, to have a buy-in, because that's the best way for this to be successful. Next slide, please. And then the fourth thing was that, you know, being able to really center the fact that the individual has a voice and deserves to be treated with dignity and respect. So no matter, you know, what their actions, really want to be able to center their dignity and their independent choices and voice to the core of it. And finally, individuals are expected to take responsibility for the natural consequences of their behavior. This is important because this can be true while you still hold space for a very non-judgmental, you know, space between you and the client. So you can have a very frank conversation about what is a consequence of their behavior, but still make sure that they're able to constantly approach you and have that space to talk about that with you. And we can go to the last panel discussion that we have today. And we kind of zoomed past some really big picture topics, and I understand that, but I really was hoping that through questions, we were able to flesh out some of these ideas in the last 10 minutes or so that we have. So question number 1, if I can get that to my own. Okay. So I really wanted to put this question towards our panelists and ask how you are able to create a safe space for your clients with trauma.
I think just ensuring them that whatever they say will stay private. And also, if they're in person, meeting with us case managers in person, I think having like a private space, an office, or somewhere, you know, away from other people who might be able to hear, can help create an atmosphere where they know, you know, they're not being overheard or anything like that.
For me, this is where I tend to sort of work as an outlet for the client, where I will go ahead and listen to them, and you know, hear them out, let them speak their truth, with no you know, judgment or nothing, and then just kind of have a conversation about whatever the subject matter maybe. And much like Nicolette said, right, everything stays between us, and nothing leaves the building or anything like that.
Yeah, so I'm sure that reassurance goes a long way with the people you're speaking with.
Yeah, I think you guys got it. Like, just piggybacking off of what was already said, just listening first, especially in your initial conversations and communications with the client, and not jumping to let's make a solution, you know, right away. You know, if it gets there and you feeling like a positive communication back and forth with the client, then you can maybe start asking questions that might lead towards some sort of solution, but just waiting until that comes naturally so that they know that they're in control, because in their previous situations, maybe they weren't able to have control.
That's great. Thank you so much for sharing that. So kind of continuing this conversation, are you guys able to think about a situation when you really wanted to give advice, but you know that you had to take a step back to create space for the client to be able to make their own choices? And can you kind of walk us through of how the process of how you proceeded and the things that you did to make sure that the client felt supported, even if this was not the way you would have gone about it per se?
I think there's sometimes, at least from the information that I've been given, there's definitely situations where, you know, it's clear from the information I have from what the client has told me, that their partner is maybe, you know, bringing them down in a sense, maybe abusive, or, you know, just in other ways that are not acting in ways that are not favorable or that help the household as a whole in any way, as far as, you know, being stabilized. And yeah, I mean, I would never say this to a client, but in my head, I'm just like, leave him, leave her, like you'll clearly be much better off. But that's, you know, for them to decide. So that's one instance where I'll just listen and, you know, keep it to myself.
Yeah, that's very important for you. That I'm so happy you shared that, because I'm sure that's a common experience for other people too.
For me, I know I had an experience with a client where there was an instance of domestic violence. And the reason being is because the client to me expressed that he heard voices. And I know that's a very difficult topic to navigate. And then we just had a simple conversation of, you know, who were they? Where were they coming from? What triggered it? And at the same time, I knew I wasn't in a position to say anything where, you know, what you're listening is not true, or maybe you should do this or do that. I just took a position of, I just listened, I understood, and then just, you know, let the client explain everything he had to explain, and that was practically it. To date, we do touch up on that subject, but at the same time, I know that I'm not in a position where I should tell the client, you know, where to go, what resources he should get, unless he feels comfortable with me addressing that.
Yeah, so really holding space for your client to be able to lead that conversation, but also giving them a lot of space to like authentically bring the experiences in, and knowing that they won't be bombarded with solutions or judgment. That's really valuable. Thank you.
Yeah, I would say similar answers again. I have had a client for a while now that's dealing with a DV situation as well as substance use. And it's just a lot of, for me, continuing to show up and be a consistent person for that person that they can continue reaching out to, and sort of gently suggesting every time, when's the next time we can check in, or do you want to get back to me tomorrow and like let me know how you're feeling or what you think. Hey, I just want to let you know that if you're feeling like you might want to look into this, here's a resource that I think could really provide you specific support. If you want to talk about that, I have it when you're ready. And then, you know, continuing in that next checkup to see if it's a possibility, and just letting them take it at their own pace.
Yeah. I think it can be really valuable to know that they have somebody in their corner who's ready to go if they want to take that step. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I guess to kind of extend this conversation then, you know, because you kind of touched upon it a little bit, but then can you give us examples of harm reduction at play, or how are you able to kind of work to mitigate harm without having to tell a person to change a whole lot about their lives? It's really kind of being acutely aware of what's happening then. I know it's a really open-ended and it has a lot of depth in one question, so feel free to share as much or as little as you feel comfortable.
Yeah, I'll just take like 30 seconds to think about it.
For sure. I know we saved the really heavy stuff for the last 6 minutes. But I think it'd be really valuable for people to hear that from you guys. And as you're thinking about it too, let me kind of tie in the last question we have, because I think it's valuable to have that conversation too, which is, you know, how are you able to recognize and address compassion fatigue, because, you've talked so much about being that support system for people who are going through a lot. But how are you able to kind of do this work effectively and consistently and make sure that you're taking care of yourselves and, taking care of the peers and the people you work with?
That one I can answer. Yeah, definitely coworkers are amazing and help so much, because we're able to discuss together, and maybe they have a perspective that I haven't heard. And yeah, just being able to talk to other people at your organization really helps a lot, in my opinion. And then yeah, definitely, there's a saying like you can't pour from an empty cup. So everyone just doing what they need to do to keep themselves well, in whatever way that looks like, is important, especially for this kind of work, where we are, sort of giving a lot, and exercising patience, understanding, and all these other behaviors that sort of run out.
Yeah. That's really insightful. Thank you for that, Nicolette. Edgar, Holly, any thoughts?
Yeah, I'm ruminating on the harm reduction. I think what happens when I think about this question is I go specifically to substance use, and but I think that harm reduction can mean so many more things than that. Just behaviors that any extreme behavior that someone is doing that is maybe negatively impacting or inflicting on their situation. And I would say similar, just opening up a dialogue and creating a situation where you can implement a strategy that is new or different. Or, maybe when you get your paycheck, what if you set aside a certain amount of money for this specific thing that you want or need? And just that. Like something, for example, is having a client who is really just having issues with spending because they were wanting to buy substances, and they knew it, and we knew it, and we talked about it. And one of the things that was consistently coming up was this person had to drive to be able to do their work. So I said, how about if every time you get your paycheck, you go buy a gas card, so that that gas card is the only thing that you could spend money on? Like, what do you think about trying that strategy? Just trying to find creative ways to encourage those positive habits and behaviors. And then with compassion fatigue within yourself and your colleagues, I mean, Nicolette said it, reaching out to your team, working with them. My supervisor likes to have lunch with us sporadically. And at our most recent lunch, someone was really in need of a conversation. And because we had that space to sit together, they were able to share that. And we were all able to kind of reach back into our own compassion, and then also see that one of our coworkers and colleagues was tired and stressed. And then everyone's like, I'm not the only one. Everyone isn't just doing the most amazing ever, and I'm the only one struggling. So just creating those spaces to have conversations, and leaning on the people that you work with because they know best.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you so much for sharing that.
And I'll go ahead and just briefly talk about compassion fatigue. Definitely counting on colleagues. I know that at times we like to have conversations that have nothing to do with work, and stuff, so that helps a lot. Definitely sharing experiences as well definitely helps. But at least for me, particularly, something that helps me a lot is just disconnecting from work. Once 5 a.m. hits, everything stays in the office, and then just come back the next day and do it all over again.
Yeah, healthy.
It's been really effective.
That's great. Thank you so much for sharing that. I know we've reached time, and I just really wanted to quickly first thank you guys for such an amazing discussion. I really, really appreciate all your really helpful insights. And I also just wanted to again thank our client who sent in the video, because I really appreciate her willingness to be vulnerable and share her experiences with us. And thank you so much to you guys for sticking around and participating in the chat and you know, in the discussion. It's been really, really valuable to kind of hear from all of you. I think Carla has put a survey link in the chat. Please, it's going to take a few minutes to fill out, but if you can fill that out, it's going to be really helpful for us to know what we can do better next time. And I believe she will also email this link to you guys when we email the rest of the materials out. But yeah, thank you so, so much for coming. I really, really appreciate all of y'all's time and energy and thoughtfulness into this process. And I hope you guys have a great day, rest of your day, and a great weekend.